This video is brought to you by SUSOIX. SUSOIX, the innovators of spikeboarding, stand-up spike, and the creators of the original skateboard spike. SUSOIX, become the motor.
Hello folks, and welcome to the Sport of SpikeBoarding. What you're looking at here are very, very simple beginner moves that begin on a board that's upside down. The wheels aren't even touching the pavement. In particular, this is just a gliding and braking skill. Please, you're about to see a video with some intermediate spikeboarding that involves board skill, handling skill, going down hills. Stay away from hills. Stay away from all hills. Stay away from all people until you can manage your speed safely, stop at all the speeds at which you accelerate to, and not be a threat to anybody around you with any of your gear. We have lots of beginner videos, and please make sure to watch all of them before proceeding to the next step. We want you to be safe and enjoy spikeboarding. Always wear wrist guards. Never get on the board without wrist guards, ever, no matter how good you become. Never get on the board without a helmet. Always wear a helmet. And in the beginning, wear elbow and knee pads as well. And if you need hip pads, hey, put them on. Get some hockey pants and blow straight through your newbie classes until you feel confident, safe, and secure. Remember, watch our beginner videos before you step up to advanced maneuvers. And completely stay away from all hills. Do not go down hills unless you can stop at all the speeds at which you accelerate. Spikeboarding is not downhill longboarding. This isn't about going down fast at high rates of speed. The speeds don't tend to go over 25, 26 miles an hour. So please enjoy the video and learn your skills well and never go for it. Become the motor. Hello folks, and welcome to another SUSOIX spikeboarding video. Today we're going to tell you about the stand-up spike stroke, but before we get into it, let's just review a little bit what a SUSOIX skateboard spike really is. So let's take a little peek at the beginning of this video. Bang! Spike tip, carbide steel. SUSOIX carbide steel spikes are sold separately. You're going to sharpen them, you're going to pop them off and remove them and put a new one on whenever you need one. That's a SUSOIX diamond file, and you are going to file your spike tip after about 2 hours of use. You're just going to have extra spikes handy to replace them. Get a SUSOIX file when you buy your skateboard spike, and keep your spike tips sharp. You're going to sharpen them on both angles and have a nice sharp spike. Always have a couple extra carbide steel tips around because newbies blow them out quick, and they'll last you about 3 months once you become intermediate. Now let's take a little look a little further up the shaft. Silicone grip at the top. Super, super grippy. Also replaceable. And what anchors it? Athletic tape. In a rope, wrap it around, stick it underneath. Again, you're going to want to have a couple extra grips laying around, and they come in 3 different sizes, 23, 25, and 28 to match the shafts. The SUSOIX shaft is full carbon fiber and also a carbon fiber fiberglass unit. Now these shafts come in 23 millimeter outside dimension, 25 millimeter outside dimension, and 28 millimeter outside dimension to match the size of your hand and the height of the athlete. So getting back up toward the top of the skateboard spike is the foam handle. The foam handle, the side, there you see, and of course you're also going to see the front. The foam handle is ergonomically shaped so that it can maintain the vector line that you must have in stand-up spike. Without that handle, you cannot maintain that vector line. So the skateboard spike is a very unique product, and it can be used in winter when snow conditions are awful for cross-country skiing. If you are seeing roads like this, you can stand up spike them. You will have a blast. Put your technical boots on, your technical clothes, your wool socks, and stand up spike the winter like mad. The SUSOIX board and the skateboard spike are completely optimized to rip, rip, rip winter. That's what we made the fenders for, and that's what we made the skateboard spike for. So now let's dig in, let's pull out of this parking lot, and I'd like to take you to a small 4-minute high side, low side loop that is totally optimized for no foot braking, no cadence braking. You're not going to put down your foot. Take very close attention to the terrain here. We're going to go up and down a little hill, then we're going to get on the circuit, and you're going to see how, if you choose wisely, you are going to have a lot of fun during your stand-up spike sessions. Here we're pulling out of this small parking lot, headed over into a little subdivision. This is a very quiet Midwest subdivision, not that much traffic, as you can see, with just undulating hills that are ever so perfect for stand-up spike. And as we cruise around here, we're going to keep switching from side to side, always on the front side. There is no backside to stand up spike. And as we come around here the second time, we're going to do some freeze frames here for you and analyze the stroke of stand up spike. So to begin with, there's a little cadence break, just a tiny little bit. And here we are on the loop itself, on the hill, headed up toward the highest part of the course. As you can see, it's just a little rolling hill, but it gives us just enough incline to make it interesting for stand-up spike. And these are the best kinds of hills for stand-up spike. We're going to take this right-hander and go about 2 more blocks, and then we'll be at the high side. Try to find areas that have 2, 3 square blocks. That's all you need. That's going to become your stand-up spike track and your loop. Figure eights are fantastic and a heck of a lot of fun, especially when you can get figure eights where the high side is right in the middle of the figure eight. Then you've got 2 low sides, 1 high side, and if you can find them where you never have to touch the ground to break, that's absolutely what you want. Again, you don't want to have downhill speeds much more over 26, 27 miles an hour. Hey, if you've got perfect runoff over those speeds, fantastic. But remember, you're looking for run out, roll out, so you're not going to have to worry about braking or speeds. Folks, this is not downhill longboarding. If you're into downhill longboarding, you just found the wrong sport. Go back to downhill longboarding, put your slide pucks on, carry some speed, have some delicious, radical, high-speed fun, put the boards into slides. We totally understand where you're coming from. Spikeboarding is exactly like cross-country skiing. You do not see cross-country skiers bombing Lindsey Vonn hills. So this is our descent here. Just a small undulating hill. That little destabilization is a twig or a rock. Keep close attention to that kind of thing. But this is about all the speed you want coming down your high side. After this, we're going to go back right into the turn and start drilling in, going up our hill, tapping into our core. So again, we're going to play this video again a little bit, and we'll do some analysis. There we are going into a little one arm for some more coverage with one arm. We covered it, but we're going to stop here and go back and pull out some very specific sections so we can show how you can swing that square. And before we get into swinging a square and stand-up spike, we need to pay very close attention to the hands and how they operate on the top of the skateboard spike. Notice how that spike is rotating in that relaxed top hand. Notice how it swivels like a ball in a socket. That's the top of the stroke. And notice how the fingers are not all the way under the front of it. And as we begin to rotate, the fingers go down around the face of it because the hand is relaxed. We're applying pressure during the power phase, and then the stroke is going to go through and the fingers all the way under on the face of the front of the skateboard spike. So let's look at this a few more times. As we go up, the fingers rotate, and that allows the vector line of the shaft to be pointing backwards. Plunge and rotate down around the front and up, and the hand stays relaxed and around. That's what makes the skateboard spike so unique. Now let's look at the shaft hand and the 3 positions. That's the final position. This is the top. We want to put the weight on the pinky finger and the finger next to it. As we go into the power phase, we're going to lock. Arms are going to be at 90 degrees, going to enter the power phase, and then finalize the stroke with our index finger and our thumb gripping around the silicone and the shaft. That is how you will look like at the very end of the stroke, and that's how your hand on the shaft will look in this body position. That is how your top hand will be, wrapped all the way around the bottom. That's the final position. And now let's take a look at the top. That's the top of the stroke. Notice how the vector line is to the rear. This is what your body will look like when you are returning your shaft, and this is how your top hand will look like. Notice how the fingers are not down around the front. There's the body headed toward the top of the stroke and the vector line to the rear. Now we enter the power phase of the stroke. The fingers wrap around and we're totally gripped and transmitting power through. That's the beginning of the power phase. The spike tip is in the middle of the board, head down, body about to bob on top of the spike and follow our square into the stroke. There's our square. You can see it. Both of our elbows are a corner, and the thorax and the hands are another corner. We're powering through, and now we're going to finalize the stroke. The hands stay dynamic, folks. The hands stay dynamic, and they need to continuously move during the loose and tight. Otherwise, the spike vector is going to come forward. Take a look at it here, and that's the top of the stroke. Now let's get into what the rest of this video is going to cover. We are going to go over the 3 stroke phases, and those would be the setup phase, or the top of the stroke, where we set up to start. The power phase, where we swing your square and you want to, most importantly, spike your square. You'll see that square. You've seen it a little bit before. We'll show you how it's made and how we power through it. And of course, the return phase with a parallel shaft. And the looping ends on both ends of your stroke so you don't look like a little robot. And your leading and trailing hip and shoulder rotation, which is very subtle. We will cover that. But first, let's start off with how we get our spike to one side and the other with a spike toss. Now, the first thing to understand with tossing your spike from one side to the other switch is that there is going to be action happening with your feet as well as your hands. So let's cover the top, and then we'll cover the bottom as well in some freeze frame and some slow motion, and you'll get your spike toss dialed in pretty quick. So we're spiking right along, and we're engaging our power phase when we feel a bit of exhaustion, and we're going to have to come to the other side to engage that muscular structure on our switch side. So the first thing that happens is that we're going to contemplate right at this moment the toss. The hands are going to separate, and then one hand is going to toss the spike straight into the other. The hand will always hold the silicone. Both hands will rise at the same time, and then the tip needs to clear the fender. As soon as the tip clears the fender, we spot the spike, and then we send it down into its power phase, and then we continue. So let's take a look at what happens with the legs. We're spiking right along in our power phase. The hands separate. The feet are still together, and then the hands toss. As the hands toss one to another, the feet begin to shift. One foot goes to the middle, one foot goes to the back. And as the tip clears, your foot should be coming to the front. And then you engage in your power stroke. This video is going to assume that you can actually ride switch, so if you haven't, make sure you check out the beginner videos on carving switch. Now let's take a look at the setup, or the top of the stroke, the setup phase. And this is where we want to make sure our feet are on the X or behind it. We want to make sure our shaft is trailing backwards and our hands at the top are leading forward. Our legs should be extended out and our elbows should be up in the air, ready to form and spike with a square formation. Enter the power phase. The spike strikes at the middle of the board or behind. At the middle of the board or behind is where you want to strike. Never forward of the middle of the board. Right in the middle and not in front. No spike zone in front of the middle of the board. And always make sure that you spike right in the middle, exactly in the middle, or to the rear in stand-up spike. There's absolutely no forward catch. Your hands at the top will be leading your spike tip. They should be in front of your spike tip at all times. Here's the return phase. It's categorized by your hands passing your quadricep. Once they pass your quadricep, it's the end of your stroke. And your legs will be at their maximum compression, ready to spring out. Also, the rear knee will be slightly pulled in to let the foam top past your quadricep. And that's the end of your stroke, and you will begin to be able to begin the return. The return phase of the stroke sees the skateboard spike's shaft almost parallel with the top of the board. See how that shaft is totally parallel with the board and it's facing to the rear. You're never going to bring it back with the tip forward. The tip is always going to be going backwards. Your vector line is headed backwards because that's the only way that you can spike the land with any kind of performance whatsoever. Spike backwards. Your elbows are going to be high and bent almost 90 degrees, and as well your legs will have reached their maximum extension and advanced will begin to heel rise slightly in the back. Also, let's take a look at the leading shoulder and the leading hip. On one side, on the right side in this particular case, the right shoulder is leading and the right hip is leading. Those both are going to rotate into the stroke. And that is the return phase. The top of the stroke, once again, let's review it. His hands are going to be stacked, one hand on top of the other hand and leading the skateboard spike. So they will not be behind. The back of the spike will be to the rear of the board. It will spike in the middle or towards the back. The hands at the top, they lead, both of them. Both of them lead the shaft and the shaft goes behind both the hands at the top. This is the top of the stroke or the setup, and you can see very well that the spike is going to spike to the rear and the front of the skateboard spike is that which leads most. So the spike is in the back and the foam handle and the hands are at the front. Never will the spike tip be at the front. There's the impact, as we can see, and our square is beginning to form. We'll begin to talk about spiking your square and swinging your square. And there's the stroke happening in slow motion, as you can see, and there's the square getting formed as we spike into our square. Let's check it out. We're going to see it again. There's the square. Your arms are going to stay locked at 90 degrees, exactly 90 degrees as you power phase and engage your core. This isn't about your arms. That's the end of our stroke. As you can see, we no longer have a square. It's turned into a bit of a triangle as we set up for the return stroke. Remember, folks, your hands need to stay dynamic. The top of the hand needs to stay rotating. If it doesn't rotate, it's going to want to bring that spike tip forward of the middle of the board. And here we have the stroke at full speed, and you can see we're spiking into a square and power phasing through a square and bringing back the skateboard spike on both sides perfectly parallel to the board. You want to keep that spike tip parallel by bringing your shoulders over and your hips slightly over. One shoulder is going to lead and the other is going to follow. Same with the hip. You want to be engaging that core constantly. Let's slow it up a little bit and let's take a peek at how this square formation is formed. Bang, there it is. You're engaging your core. Keep those arms totally locked as you go into your square and power phase into the core. That is the most effective way. It will be the most effective way forever for you to stand up on land. Bang, spike that square and then swing it back. Spike it down and swing it back. Spike it down and swing it back. There you see the square as it swings back. Notice how the spike trails the shaft, constantly trails the shaft, comes to the center and powers through with the square. There it is, nice and slow-mo, and you can see your square. If your arms are extended, you're doing it wrong. You've got to make sure that at the top of your setup, you're just slightly further extended than 90 degrees. The idea is to keep your elbows high and keep that stroke going. Spike your square, swing it right back. Spike, swing it back, and switch. And spike it, swing it back. Spike it, swing it back. Spike it, swing it back. Spike it, swing it back, and switch to the other side. There's your square as you swing it back. Take a peek at it again. As you power through it, you're spiking your square there, and you're swinging it back. And you're going to switch on both sides of the board. There's the square right at the moment of impact, and you're powering through. Bang. There's the square as you swing it back. Swing your square, spike your square. Absolutely. That's how you're going to engage power in land-based stand-up. So let's take a little peek at shoulder and hip rotation a little more and pay close attention to what's going on with our leading shoulder and our leading hip. So the hip and the shoulder need to turn into the stroke. That shoulder needs to drop down in and that hip needs to swivel around. The hip you cannot see as much. The trailing shoulder and the trailing hip you will see are offset by the feet. And we need to engage that shoulder, swing it down into the stroke, and swivel that hip around just a little bit to engage the core. That's what helps us to engage the core. So as we swing down, notice that shoulder swings into the stroke, and our hip, we can't see it, but there's an emphasis that's bringing it around. By the nature of it being a staggered stance, the hip has a leading side, and the shoulders don't necessarily have to have a leading side because your waist can rotate. So you got to make sure that you're bringing your shoulder around. If you don't bring your shoulder around, you're going to have that foam in front of you, and you're not going to establish a parallel spike, and you're going to have a loss of energy going out to the side. And the last thing we want to show in this video is how to loop your ends. Essentially what you want is one continuous circle of tight and loose and loose and tight. And at the bottom and the top you don't want a pause in your stroke. You want to loop the ends. And the only thing you need to do that is contemplate that as your arms get close to the bottom and the tops of the stroke, that there's little tracks that are loop at the bottom, loop at the top. And as they get close, just insert them into that loop, go up and over, and at the bottom, go under and back up. And keep a constant, steady circle of loose and tight and spiking and swing your square. So once again, here we're going to go into our little descent on headed towards our downside. We hope you've enjoyed this tutorial video. Watch it over and over and over again. And if you are still a beginner, head back to our beginner videos and try to execute all of your strokes as slowly as possible. Everything you've seen in this video should be able to be executed perfectly at 1 to 2 miles an hour, extremely slow. Never forget that you cannot go fast until you can go slow. How slow can you go perfectly will establish how fast you'll be able to go later. Spike hard, spike often, and enjoy the fitness.
This video is brought to you by SUSOIX. SUSOIX, the innovators of spikeboarding, stand-up spike, and the creators of the original skateboard spike. SUSOIX, become the motor.